What do I think of San Martin? Why waste money on Rolex or Tudor when you see what you can get from a brand like San Martin? People say San Martin is great. People say that anybody that spends more money on a watch is mad. Homage brands like San Martin, Pagani, and a whole lot of others are proving to be very popular with a lot of people. It's about time I put in my 2 cents. Let's dive in. For this video, I'm not critiquing any specific watch, so it's not a watch review. It's more so a deep dive into what you get and what you don't get when buying something from a brand like San Martin. And it can very well be likely applied to a myriad of other similar manufacturers. The most succinct way I can describe San Martin is by saying they are very good. They are excellent for the price and are continually getting better. There's no question about it. As San Martin has grown, as they have improved their manufacturing techniques, their watches have consistently gotten better and better. A watch from them in 2 years' time is likely going to be a further step up from what they are offering right now. You can also find enough videos online where macros of dials and bezels and cases stand up very close to, and in some cases seemingly better than Tudor or Rolex or Omega counterparts. Bracelets have gotten better and better. Quirks like reusing bezels with 90-click bezels where 60 or 120 was needed are slowly disappearing. You still get quirks though. There's still no-date models with date-capable movements inside and other weird examples. I don't condone buying counterfeit products. Passing off a product as original is unacceptable as far as I'm concerned and takes away from the original designer's hard work in designing their creations. But an homage, I'm fine with that. Any clothes on the haute couture runways of Paris or London or Tokyo are instantly copied and available in H&M a few days after release. An homage allows people that love watches that either can't afford or refuse to spend the amount of money that is needed to acquire a Tudor or Rolex or Omega to get a good watch experience. I also don't believe Rolex is losing as much as 1 cent to these homage manufacturers, and watch enthusiasts are never going to mistake an homage for an original. And even if they do, who cares? As long as you're buying a watch because you like it, then go for it. It just doesn't mean homages are perfect. Whether you like it or not, an homage is not creative. Part of buying anything original, a painting, a pair of shoes, or a watch, is about appreciation of the designer's work. Somebody somewhere thought up a design with a pencil and paper and went through the effort of transforming that original creative idea into a product that someone else could enjoy and appreciate. The San Martin and similar homages have very little, if none, of that at all. I have a print of a Van Gogh painting in my home. I still appreciate it. I can't afford any Van Goghs, but in my home I have original art from lesser artists. But nevertheless, they are artists who I've chosen to support. And owning a Zinn or a Seiko or an Anodane or a Rolex does in some way support not only just a corporate entity out to make money, but also the designer and the watchmaker behind that little creation on my wrist. That original creation has a value, and it's something I and others will on occasion be willing to pay more for, because I appreciate the effort that went into making that original work. If there's one thing I have trouble with, it's people that say they don't want to support overpriced, expensive, faceless corporations that are bleeding us dry. San Martin and all those other manufacturers are in it to make a buck as well. You might feel that you're sticking it to the corporate Swiss man, but you're just supporting some corporate Chinese man instead. And sure, they're cheaper, but they are, as far as I'm concerned, even more in it to make a buck than Tudor or Rolex. They are, after all, currently making 90% of their money by replicating somebody else's work. But there is a very big price difference for two products that are seemingly very similar. How do you keep the price so low? As a rule of thumb, I've heard estimates that having a dealer network adds 50% to the wholesale price. So you take a $10,000 Submariner, its wholesale price on which Rolex is making a profit is likely around $6,500. Omega made a net profit of 15% in 2023. Let's just ballpark Rolex and say 20%. That's just take 20% off 6,500. That means the full cost of the Submariner is $5,000. That's a cost to managing the overall business, marketing the products, designing the watches, buying the materials, and manufacturing and testing the product. First of all, the cost to manage the business is significantly lower. They don't have a complex business that has to ensure that you have dealers, that you have to comply with government regulations and everything that comes with being a business in the EU or the US. You might not value any of those regulations and requirements that are put on Rolex and all the others, but San Martin doesn't have that overhead. You might think that the HR department is pointless in your company, but they do serve a purpose, and the number of people a Chinese company throws at HR and employee welfare is going to be significantly less than anything a Swiss brand does. Second, the homage brands are not spending any money on marketing. Like the business overhead, you're likely happy you're not paying for those expensive Rolex sponsorships and will happily do without. But it is part of what keeps those San Martin costs much lower. The downside is there's little to no identity to San Martin. It's irrelevant what name is on the dial because no effort has been put into building a brand to which you may develop an emotional connection. And sure, marketing and branding is just money out the window, but we don't just buy these watches for rational reasons. These are emotional products. A mechanical watch is, after all, pointless in this day and age. So that marketing does have some value. Copying something is massively cheaper than coming up with the idea yourself. You don't have to pay a ton for designers. The actual act of retro engineering an existing product is cheaper than building something from scratch. It's just easier to take an existing product, give it to an engineer, tear it apart, and figure out how to make a reasonable facsimile. Everything's made in China. Whether some random Swiss brand actually produces 100% of their watch in Switzerland or only 50% gets made under the Swiss made standards, the cost of putting something together in Switzerland is way higher than China. The median Chinese salary is half that of the Swiss. If you are on the factory floor in a Chinese factory, that gap widens considerably. Electricity, water, and everything else is cheaper in China. Real estate is cheaper in China. The bureaucracy around living up to working conditions and employer protections are way more lenient, and that also makes operating a business cheaper. Everything about building something in China is just cheaper. Those four things, overhead, design, marketing, location, are massively going to bring down the cost of that product. There's no question about it. But there are still two things left that I haven't touched on, and that's the materials and the details of the manufacturing. Do me a favor and go to the San Martin website and look through the catalog. Check for Rolex homages, Tudor homages, Omega homages, Patek and AP homages. You're going to notice a couple of things. The Rolex and Tudor homages are their best homages. The worst are the Omegas, the APs, the Pateks. Their Seamaster 300M homage lacks the helium escape valve. You also won't find a faux rivet Tudor bracelet either. The latter is partly because nobody wants those rivets, but mainly it's because those things are harder and more expensive to replicate. Their closest Nautilus homage is not a multiple component case construction like the 5811, and it's nowhere near as close to the original in terms of accuracy. Their Rolexes, on the other hand, come really, really close. The one reason is, of course, that they likely sell a lot of Rolex homages, but the second is Rolex and Tudor and vintage Omegas are incredibly simple, uncomplicated designs that are relatively easy to replicate. An oyster bracelet is relatively easy and cheap to replicate compared to a Nautilus or a Royal Oak bracelet. What you should draw from this is that they are best and cheapest where the case and dial complexity is lowest. As complexity goes up and detailing goes up, San Martin currently has a harder time. Secondly, their quality is focused on the most readily visible aspects of a watch. You might not care, but to me, throwing in a date movement in a no-date model is lazy. It speaks to a manufacturing approach that prioritizes cost. If you stick with the movement, there's also no labor of love in optimizing the movement. It's internal, so it just has to function. These watches are first and foremost being sold on what makes them look good on the surface. That's also why they've historically had quirks like a 90-click bezel on a dive watch or a 120-click bezel on a GMT. Their homage of a Tudor Black Bay Pro is thinner, but that's because the movement inside is not only inferior, but it's also thinner. The thinness is not a consequence of them innovating on the movement like Tudor have done on the latest generation of Metis movements in the Black Bay monochrome. It's a side effect of using a bog standard thin movement. Whatever they have on the shelf that gets the job done is what gets used. For the same reason, the clasps are getting better and better, but they are standardized and don't follow the same visual design cues as every watch they are emulating. The bezel will align and be solid because that's something people notice. But is it a ceramic ball bearing mechanism that is a bit smoother and also more resistant to wear? No. The homage brands prioritize components that contribute to making the watch look good, but the less visible stuff, like the movement, is where they optimize. When it comes to the build quality of a San Martin versus Rolex or a Tudor, it's also the nuances in production techniques and materials that make the difference. The whole reason I bring this up is not to tell you, of course, a Rolex is better. You know that already. It's to nuance the discussion. I've seen so many videos where you get macro shots of San Martins versus name brands and I trust the videos completely. The polish of the case, the crispness of the ceramic inlay, and the precision of the hands is as good or potentially better than the name brand. I'm not going to dispute it at all, but I take issue with the weight this measure has in assessing the watch. A watch starts basically as a block of steel. From there, a rough mill is made and the core case shape is brought into the world. From here, the polishing starts, and only after that do the micro details start getting added. From there, you get the details of things like etching on the rehaut, the cutting of the dial, and the enameling of the dial. My point is, a milled case that has been very well polished is one of the first rungs on the ladder of things that go into a good watch. Boiling a watch's quality down to which one under a macro has the best polish, to me at least, misses the point. I've yet to meet someone that owns a Rolex that has said, I really wish it was better polished. The things that really drive up the cost on the Rolex is the laser etching on the rehaut. It's the perfect magnification ratio of the Cyclops and the position of the Cyclops. It's the molding process of the numerals on the ceramic bezel that gives that 3D effect that the Homage doesn't have. When Rolex uses 904L steel, it drives up cost. The material itself is a little bit more expensive, not a lot, but it's also a harder material to work on, so the machines go slower and there's more wear and tear on the bits used. The 904L steel will also stand up to wear and tear much more than 316L steel will on the San Martin. The San Martin gets a perfectly acceptable 200 meters of water resistance, where an Omega that it replicates has 300 meters and a functioning helium escape valve. The movement on an Omega is guaranteed to a whole other level of accuracy, power reserve, and anti-magnetism. The movement on the Omega also has all sorts of cool techniques that make it significantly more worthy of getting a display case back. A display case back in and of itself drives up the cost because it's not just the price of the sapphire, it's the work that goes into securing it and ensuring that you can still use it at 300 meters of water resistance. Sending that Omega off to Metas for approval also costs money. An engraved case back is also a nuance and a detail that costs something and has a value. Whether it's the NH35 movement or the water resistance or whatever, two things are clear to me. The San Martins are exceptional, without question, at replicating those basics. The polish, the ceramic, the plots, the bracelets, because those are likely the first things people notice. But it's the materials, the nuances, the details of those Omegas and Tudors and Rolexes that mostly are the cost drivers, and those are the things you don't get. San Martin right now, I think, avoids a lot of those nuances because I don't think they can do the nuances. They are still detailed techniques that are out of range of their skill. The nuances are also not important. Getting a good polish, a decent bracelet, and a clear, crisp dial is enough to satisfy the customer that they're aiming for. And finally, the nuances are difficult and they drive up costs massively and would make their products unattractive. So they stick to delivering really well on the basics at an exceptionally low price, and that is what people appreciate them for. When you put all those things together, a low overhead, building everything in China, no marketing, and sticking to being very good at the basics, you get a product that is of a very high base quality at a very affordable price. Could they do all those things that I mentioned? A helium escape valve, an engraved case back, a laser etched rehaut? Well, the question is the technology within their reach, or is it something that only high-end brands can do? And the answer is clear. Of course they could. I have no doubt. Apart from maybe some patented techniques, I'm sure these homage brands over time would be able to do most, if not all, of what Rolex, Omega, and Tudor are capable of doing. I don't see it happening though, at least not at any significant pace. I think that the cost would be prohibitive. An homage is compelling at a couple of $100s, but if you have to pay $1,000, then wouldn't you consider investing in a name brand with an original design? I think a lot of people would opt out of the homage at $1,000 or $1,500. But I've seen what Chinese manufacturers can do in most other industries. If you give them enough time and money, they will be capable. But they won't right now because it doesn't currently make business sense. I've thought a lot about how to describe San Martin, and earlier I circled around the Van Gogh metaphor. But I don't think San Martin is that print of a Van Gogh. I think the comparison's wrong. For me, San Martin versus Rolex or Tudor can to some degree be likened with a discussion about wine. I'm not a big wine guy, say Beaujolais and Pinot Noir, and I'll smile and nod, but I don't really know what the differences are. But I do know this about wine. Good wine and bad wine don't equate to expensive and cheap wine. But when expensive wine is good, it has something that cheap good wine rarely, if ever, has. Expensive good wine differs from cheap good wine in the nuance, in the details. The base taste of a good cheap wine is often great, but the subtle details, the complexity, the aromas, the depth, those are often less pronounced in the cheap good wines. And that's what I think San Martin is. They have that baseline good taste. They focus on doing the basics well. They have largely little to no creativity. They leverage others' ideas for their own profit. They are not noble watchmakers dedicated to a creative endeavor. They also do not prioritize anything complex, nuanced, or invisibly important. It's not a criticism, but it adds nuance so we know that a good watch is something more than a really well-polished case. Some people either can't or choose not to spend a whole lot of money on expensive watches. These homage brands give them an access, which I think is cool. For me, though, a big part of watches is the creativity that goes into the designs. I like supporting not just the conglomerate, but the designer and the engineer behind the original idea. And that's why it's been a while since I last bought an homage. I assign value to the nuance of a oil-filled tegimented Zinn or a functioning helium escape valve of a Seamaster 300M. Not that I'd ever use it, but it's cool that they built it. Are Swiss watches often too expensive? Absolutely. But the story, the original idea, the attention to nuance and precision is important to me. But I also am privileged to once in a while being able to actively choose to afford some of those nuances. I'm humbled to that fact. You should enjoy watches the way you want to enjoy watches. Spend the amount of money you feel is appropriate for you. And stop caring about whether someone else does or doesn't spend money on an homage or a Rolex. Both are just watches. Buy what you like. Hopefully not too controversial a topic. Let me know how you see things. I'm very curious to hear what you think. If I've missed an angle or if you see a different perspective. So let me know in the comments. Be nice, but let me know what you think. As always, like, subscribe. Cheers.